In this tutorial, you'll learn how to adjust the settings for the crop overlay button in the WebSharp panel. If you haven't already watched the tutorial on how to use the crop overlay, I recommend going back to watch that first. Let's go ahead and create our crop overlays first. So we'll just load them into our image as we normally would. And we'll now explore a few options. Let's say I'm just going to work with the square template here. When I click in settings in the panel, go to the crop overlay tab. We have a few options up top here. We'll get to the template in a subsequent video, but right now just focus on the top here where we have a few options. This dim cropped areas controls whether or not you can see the areas that are outside the visible crop. So I could bring this back to say about 50%, click done, and now you can see through the edges there. So changing that setting can be really handy. Maybe you just want to turn it off by bringing it down to 0 and you always see the edges there. It's whatever you want it to be. I personally like to either make things 100% or a really high percentage like 90, 95. And that way it really helps you focus on what's important, but you can see a little bit of the original image there if you need to figure out what's going to happen as you move this thing around. Next, we go back in here. We have the option to use a custom overlay color. You can click on this swatch, pick a color, let's say green, say OK. And when this is checked, it'll use this color and overlay our template. So when I click done, you'll see that we switch to this green view. And that might be really handy if you're working with a high key image where white doesn't stand out, or for whatever reason, you just need to use a different color. It will recolor your template here rather than forcing you to go into the template and recolor all of its component pieces. Of course, it'll recolor everything, so that may or may not be what you want. Lastly, it says, use overlays marked visible even when the top level group is hidden. Let's explore this option. I'm going to say done and just leave it off at its original default. So in this case, if I were to execute things right now, I would just get this square post because it's what's visible. And so if I go make sure my settings are set to leave the image open, we'll see the output. I click on sharpen and it's going to create one version of the image from the one visible overlay that I had. And so I've got it. There's my one output. That's typical. I'm going to close that. But of course, you probably don't want to save this visible in your image. It might be more convenient to just simply hide the group for your regular work. And wouldn't it be nice if you could still use those overlays even when this was hidden? Well, you can if you go into settings and go to crop overlay and make sure use overlays marked visible even when top level group is hidden is checked. So when this is checked, it's going to go find any layer that has a visibility icon, even though I can't see this because the group is hidden, because this one is sort of like visible, if this were visible, then it will use it. Let's click done. And let's just suppose instead we're going to work with the portrait. So I'm going to make this visible for a second to just change this, but hide that. So right now, under the default settings, if I click sharpen, it wouldn't use any overlay at all. It would just use the normal defaults. But because I've changed that setting, now when I click sharpen, it's going to pull from this portrait crop here. And indeed, you see we get a portrait crop. So that's just a nice, convenient way to give you a little bit of flexibility if that's how you like to work. And I think that leaving this on is probably something a lot of you might want to do so that you're not accidentally saving your file with visible crops that show up in Lightroom in places you don't want them. Just gives you a little bit more flexibility. In either case, if the sub group here, if this crop is hidden itself, it's not used. So I could go and make all these visible, hide the group, and I would get 4 outputs here. If I go click sharpen now, it's going to process the image 4 times. So just be aware there's a difference between hiding the group and hiding the actual crop. And those are the main settings for working with your overlay.